Hey everyone, we are here with Sam from Arweave. He's the co-founder and he'll be doing a talk on things Web3 can learn from DeFi. Once he starts talking, can you guys confirm in the chat that you can hear him?
Okay, thanks everyone. Really great to be here. I'm very excited to share with you some of the, I guess, thoughts and discussions we've been having at Arweave about DeFi over the summer as we kind of watched the speculative involvement and excitement in the space grow. So Arweave's kind of point of view here is we're not a DeFi project fundamentally, but we do work in a kind of adjacent space. We work in the Web3 space. And we see that what's happening here can be very, let's say, instructive. I think for Web3 founders while they're building products down the line. Can someone just quickly check and tell me whether you can actually see and hear me? That'd be great.
Yes, audio is great, and we can see everything.
Okay, perfect. All right, let's get to it. Thank you. Okay, so as we can see, I don't think this is any surprise to anyone here. Total locked value in DeFi has been going through a pretty explosive period of growth since the start of the summer. This was, I would say, the summer of degen. This is where money started flowing in the DeFi system where it really hadn't before. And there had been previous episodes where DeFi had gained some level of adoption. For example, DAI in the Ethereum ecosystem had been, essentially growing for a number of years now. But we'd never seen a takeoff like this. But interestingly, if we look at the last 90 days, we see that really we appear to have reached at least a temporary plateau in the excitement and growth of the space. And I think that presents us with an excellent opportunity to have a look back, see what we can learn from the things that have happened in the space, and try and extract out some wisdom that might be valuable while we're building Web3 applications, on top of these crypto networks, whatever those networks are. But in order to kind of give you some, say, like overview of where we're seeing this, like the angle we're seeing this from at Arweave, I just want to quickly introduce what Arweave is, the permaweb and profit sharing communities, which are really the lens through which we're looking at all of this development. So broadly, Arweave is a permanent information storage network. That means that you put a piece of information into the Arweave network, it's replicated on nodes essentially indefinitely. And we make this work using a new proof system called proof of access, which essentially swaps out the mining process that you get with Bitcoin or other blockchains with the valuable storage of information, a data set. And we also pair this with actually an almost DeFi-like primitive called a storage endowment. Basic principle is this: when you put a piece of information into Arweave, you pay for the storage of that piece of information for 200 years. Sounds like a lot, but actually storage is so cheap, that's approximately ½ cent per megabyte at the moment. And then over time, the cost of storage declines. And this essentially gives you interest in the form of storage purchasing power on the principal that you've already put up. So if you put up 200 years worth of storage purchasing power in the first year, or the 0th year, the time of entry into the network, then because the cost of storage generally declines, your storage purchasing power at the end of the year will be higher than it was at the start of the year. The rate of storage cost decline is approximately 30.5% over the last 50 years. And Arweave, of course, because it's 200-year principle, expects a storage decline rate of 0.5%. So as long as that 30.5% stays above 0.5%, you've essentially got interest to pay for the storage of that piece of information that you've inserted into the network forever. So on top of the Arweave network it lives the permaweb. The permaweb is essentially all the pieces of information inside the Arweave network available in web browsers. So you can take your, any kind of browser, and you can point it at arweave.net stroke, and then a transaction ID, and it'll be served back to you to your device. And of course, because this is essentially just a web page, or at least the other server that you're speaking to is a web server, it'll be rendered just as if you'd essentially accessed it through Amazon S3, for example. And that means that as well as being able to host documents that you want to store for a long period of time, say academic writing. So when you contribute to science, of course, you want to spread your knowledge that you've created far, but you also want to spread it for very long periods of time. You want it to be accessible basically forever. Same with Wikipedia articles, or potentially if you want to write blog posts, you want to make sure that that information is perpetuated for as long and as far as you can make it. And the permaweb essentially allows you to do this. You just put the information into the permaweb rather than the normal web. Then it's backed by these endowments that ensure that people over time can have access to it. But not only can you store static web pages and content like PDFs on the Arweave, or even videos now, you can also store full web applications. And these can query the Arweave itself, essentially allowing you to build dynamic Web 2 style apps that are running in a fully decentralized way. So you can now build decentralized versions of basically every Web 2 application, like Facebook, Twitter, even Netflix would be possible now. And have it run, yes, entirely decentralized in an ownerless fashion with basically all of the properties that you're used to with a blockchain just applied to web services. So this is the permaweb. But on top of this lives a new series of applications that we call profit-sharing communities. So put simply, profit-sharing communities are a fairer way to build web startups. You can think of them like a decentralized autonomous organization that has created a web app and then distributes profit to the owners of the tokens in the system proportionately to their ownership share when usage happens. So this has three main advantages. The first is real-time profit sharing. So we like to think of this as kind of dividends version 2. And the best way to understand it is to actually contrast it with dividends v1. So in dividends v1, you had a centralized organization, let's call it Facebook, and you could buy shares in Facebook. But on the public market, the class of shares that are listed are Class B shares. Mark Zuckerberg owns Class A shares. Class A shares have a 7 times governance right. So voting power, essentially, than Class B shares. So although Mark Zuckerberg owns approximately 11% of Facebook, every time there's a vote, he has a monopoly on the power involved. He can pretty much veto anything he likes. Okay, so as a Facebook shareholder, then you're kind of like, there's no value in terms of governance that you're deriving from the holding of this asset. So then, all right, but traditionally we look at, very traditionally, we look at the value of shares related to the dividends that they produce, right? You hold the share, produces dividends, which you then allow you to just accrue value. It's essentially interest. However, if you look at all of the successful Web 2 startups, almost all, I think, of the successful Web 2 startups that have listed on the NASDAQ and the like, you'll find that actually they basically do not issue dividends at all to their shareholders. And this is quite striking. It means that, okay, so if you own a Facebook Class B share, what precisely is the value derived from other than the brand Facebook? And that's really quite striking. It doesn't appear to be a very sane system on which to base, what would you say, financially prudent decisions. So with Dividends 2.0 and real-time profit sharing with profit-sharing communities, we take a different approach. We say, in fact, the precisely opposite approach. We say, okay, well, every time a user uses an application, they should send a small tip to one of the token holders in the profit sharing token that backs the community relative to their ownership share. So for example, if you and I were at a hackathon and we build this blogging platform together, I give you 50% of the profit sharing tokens, and then we both go away and we are now kind of incentivized, which is great, to go and try and get users onto this system. And every time a user makes a blog post, there's a 50% chance that I get the tip, and there's a 50% chance that you get the tip. So now you can see if you scale it up to something like Facebook, essentially, as long as people are continuing to use the web application, then you're continuing to accrue tips. And this means that the profit sharing tokens in these communities are extremely robust assets for holding value, which makes them extremely exciting, I think, as an asset class. But the way that these tokens are issued is also very different. So instead of having this structure where in a typical startup, if I'm, say, even the third or fourth employee, I might only be presented with an equity stock option plan, ESOP, that allows me to buy up to 0.5% of the, for the sake of argument, we're just going to call them tokens, the equity, but it's basically tokens. 0.5% of the tokens in the system. So I'm paid the majority of my my wage in fiat dollars, and then I can buy back some of the company that I have worked essentially all of my adult life to increase the value of with some of those fiat dollars, but only up to a small cap. This just fundamentally isn't really very fair. Profit sharing communities flip this model. They say instead, okay, well, actually, when people produce things of value, they are paid directly in profit sharing tokens that relate to the application that they've just built. And then they have a choice. They can either hold the tokens, and if they do so, they will continue to accrue value in the mechanisms that were described previously, or they can monetize some of it, but they get to choose how much. And of course, when you're giving out these tokens, you could vest them for even just 1 or 2 months. And in doing so, you create an incentive for people to do good work, because the value, essentially their take-home pay, is relative to the value that they are producing. This is a fundamentally better mechanism design for incentivizing employees. And it's also just fundamentally fairer. And finally, these organizations have better governance. So it's actually pretty simple how this works. When you want to take part in the governance of a profit-sharing community that has built a web application, your voting power is typically, I mean, the founders can change the way that this mechanism works. Of course, it's just a smart contract to the base. But typically what would happen is you take the number of tokens and you multiply it by the time for which those tokens are locked. And now you have skin in the game weighted, skin in the game weighted voting. So the longer you are, the longer you are attached to the project, so the longer your capital is unavailable to you, the more say you get in the driving of where the project should go next over time. And again, you just got to contrast this approach to what you would see in the Web 2 world, where we have a traditional company where there's a board of directors, and some of those directors may not actually be incentivized for the long term so much at all. And you can also get situations where, for example, private equity firms come in and they buy the entire thing in a forced sale of some kind, even a potentially leveraged sale, and then they can strip out and well, one way to look at it is repurpose, another way to look at it is destroy the thing that the employees and the people that have been working on this startup have essentially committed their lives to producing. So we think that the giving governance rights to the people that have created the value is the right thing to do, both for them and also for the long term of the project that they're creating and the fulfillment of the vision. There's another component here is that the founders, when you go to join a startup, they essentially try and sell you the vision of why their startup is an exciting thing to spend your life working on. If there is no representation of the employees at the management or governance level, then keeping keeping alignment with that vision is actually quite difficult over time. So bundled together, you can really just think of these as decentralized autonomous web applications run by communities of people that are sharing in the profit that is being created. We think the model is extremely powerful. The community, the Arweave ecosystem really came up with this idea collaboratively about 2 months ago, and we've been absolutely blown away with the things that people have built since then. Here's just like 15 of, or is it what, slightly more? No, 15 of the projects that have been started on the system. And right now, as far as I'm aware, there's 22 profit sharing communities on the Arweave network, 7 or 8 of which are in the final stages of closing funding, external funding rounds, or have already closed. And I think the total market cap of these projects combined, even though we're just 2 months in, is over $10 million, something like that. So what's really exciting is that the growth of this ecosystem has been extremely rapid, because it appears that the founders and the contributors to these projects have really cottoned on to why this is a objectively better system for running organizations, and they're now just starting to run with it and build out really exciting apps. So, okay, that's everything about Arweave we'll talk about. Thank you for giving me the space to kind of show you where, what would you say, how we're thinking about this, from what lens we're looking at this. Summer of degen. So at the beginning of the summer, we saw the rise of the degenerate meme, the DeFi traders calling them, and yield farmers calling themselves degenerates, which I think really marks the moment at which all of this started to unfold at a pretty rapid pace. There's quite a few things that I think are really valuable for the founders of Web3 projects to take away from this. So let's run through it. I think some of these are kind of, what would you say, like reinforcements of things we already all kind of know in the space, but like really profound reinforcements. Like incentives always win. I think most of us are kind of aware that, what does Warren Buffett's co-CEO or whatever they call it, co-president say? It's something like, you show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcomes. We all kind of know this like intellectually, but it's sometimes different to see it in practice. So one of the things we saw was the creation of SushiSwap and the battle that ensued between Uniswap and SushiSwap over time. And this was really fascinating. It showed that the assumption that people providing liquidity on Uniswap were sort of largely inert, say, is completely false. Actually, people in the crypto community just follow what they are incentivized to do almost precisely. And that, as a Web3 founder, is a very important thing to get your head around. Like, what you incentivize is what you shall get. So here we see total value locked in Uniswap over versus SushiSwap over time. So you can see that Uniswap, yes, we're kind of like, we're going at a pretty reasonable rate of growth until suddenly SushiSwap launches. And at that point, a lot of capital that was not being staked on Uniswap yet, because there wasn't a strong enough incentive, is suddenly very rapidly staked inside the protocol. And this leads to enormous growth very, very quickly. And then starts the SushiSwap migration. So from, essentially moving capital from the Uniswap protocol where it was receiving sushi rewards to the SushiSwap protocol. And obviously in order to receive the sushi that was being given out. And we see that, okay, immediately, a very large proportion of that capital is reallocated in the ecosystem into SushiSwap, what would you say, pure SushiSwap. Okay, that's pretty interesting. Then we see that as soon as Uniswap launches its token, basically almost all of that liquidity moves back to Uniswap. And if you, I couldn't unfortunately find a graph that showed us a conglomeration of Uni and Sushi prices and market cap, and what would you say? Yes, essentially farming yield. But you can see over time how essentially what's happening here is that the yield farmers are simply and programmatically almost following what it is that they're incentivized to do. It's just you had a better APR on Uniswap, so you move back to it. And this is a pretty important lesson to learn, because it shows actually that arguably brand loyalty was valuable for Uniswap in making the Uniswap token valuable, but brand loyalty was not enough to overcome the financial incentives when SushiSwap came along in the first place. And again, I couldn't find a good graphical representation of this, but one of the things you can look at is what the market sentiment was around Uniswap once SushiSwap launched. You actually saw that the market sentiment really turned against Uniswap. Uniswap was seen as like this old thing. But then as soon as they launched the token, the kind of like old thing, fantastically interesting, I would say, became the institution of the DeFi space. And subsequently, the token associated with it held a lot of value, at least in people's heads. And then, of course, people moved back because the APR was higher, because it held a lot of value. So people do what they are incentivized to do. And I think in Web3 projects, we can note that in a lot of cases, there aren't strong financial incentives for developers to pick up Web3 products. So we might think about some protocols that are offering, for example, private storage of user data. So a protocol where I'm storing data for a user in a vault. Something like, for example, what are they called? Solid pods that Tim Berners-Lee has been working on for quite a while. It's a really great idea. I love the idea and I want it to succeed. But what I see is that actually from the developer's incentive point of view, well, why should I pick that up? Why do I want that to be the case? Why don't I want access to the user's data? Actually, the user's data is valuable, and so I'm disincentivized from making sure I can't have access to it. And so I think this is an incentive problem that we as a community need to solve in order to make this fantastic thing happen, which is privacy of user data. But it doesn't stop there. Of course, I think it's generally applicable to many projects in the Web3 space. The incentives for the developers and sometimes the incentives for the consumers are just not quite aligned. And we stand, I would say, in the position of Uniswap on August 27th. Like we're pretty vulnerable, so we should get our ideas in order and fix this before it's too late. Okay, so another thing we've seen is that pseudonymous founders lead to healthy trust minimization. Now, this is a really interesting and I would say potentially controversial opinion, but what I can see looking at the space from the outside, I mean, I'm not a degen farmer, so I haven't lost any money or gained any money in this wave, but what I can see is that when a founder comes along for example, something like Pasta, which is a fork of Yam, which I think it's fair to say in retrospect, Pasta is not going to hold very much value. I don't think I'm offending too many people there. When the pseudonymous founders of Pasta come along and they say, hey, come dump all of your money into our protocol and I'll give you some other coin of sketchy value, there is very little trust in those founders. Perhaps they will rug pull, as they say. And so what we saw is communities gathering around and saying, okay, well, let's take a look at the code together. Let's do a decentralized code audit very quickly. Not a professional job, but you saw people gathering around, putting a healthy mistrust in the founders for a decentralized community, and then gaining a better understanding of what it was that they were involved in. And this, I think, is very, very interesting, because I think fundamentally it's actually a flaw to have founders that are well known in the community if you truly want a network or an application to be decentralized. You want it to be the case that, like for Bitcoin nowadays, for example, you want it to be the case that the community feels complete ownership and understanding of what it is that they're involved in. It's a community-owned affair. And you gained that very rapidly, for example, with Pasta, because nobody trusted the founders. So they just went and checked what they were up to. And this, for example, is a diff that someone made. So someone made a tool that allows you to take two contracts on Ethereum and compare the source code, and then highlight the lines that have changed. And this is a screenshot from a community-based audit of the Pasta protocol, which again was a fork of Yam. And we could just see, like, what is going on here? We can check it to see whether what the founder is telling us makes sense. And of course, don't get me wrong, there have been certainly immense missteps in this regard. So SushiSwap could also be said to be one of these. When Chef Nomi comes along and says, oh, guys, I've just removed the whole dev fund and sold it so that I can, quote, stop thinking about money, unquote. And I don't want to get into the politics of this whole thing, but it's clear to say that the community interpreted this as a breach of trust. And I think they've learned from this now. And now there's a wider understanding and what would you say, a better skepticism, which leads again to this trust minimization that brings us down the road of Bitcoin much, much faster than we were seeing in the wider crypto space outside of DeFi. So this, I think, is certainly a very interesting pattern to kind of recognize and to consider if you are a Web3 founder and you're being serious about the idea of making a decentralized application. Maybe you don't want people to trust you so much. Maybe you want them to have a complete understanding of the protocol and the application that you're proposing, such that they feel a higher level of ownership. Just a thought. Okay, decentralized media is moving much, much faster than centralized media. This one is pretty simple. the DeFi craze showed that really, if you want to keep on top of what was happening, you just need to be in a whole bunch of Telegram channels and watching crypto Twitter, watching and reading like CoinDesk and The Block, as much as, well, I personally believe both of those to be high quality publications. They won't keep you on the edge of the knife, so to speak, on the knife edge. If you want to do that, you've got to keep up with decentralized media channels. And again, if you're a founder in the Web3 space and you're thinking about, okay, how do I get growth and adoption of my application? This is really worth keeping an eye on. Like the mixture of incentives and decentralized media is extremely powerful. So really, you might want to be spending more time thinking about memes on Twitter than thinking about how you can get an article or something interesting for an article in CoinDesk or The Block. And I was trying to work out throughout this whole kind of craze, just what was the lag, right? What was the slowdown between, when things were reported in the centralized crypto media versus when they were happening in the DeFi space. And as far as I could tell, it's approximately a month for sentiment. They are lagging by a month. And this is, Cointelegraph, September 11th, saying DeFi is a once in a decade investment opportunity. True or false? DeFi could be a huge investment opportunity or a bubble ready to burst, and both. Obviously, I personally actually believe it is both, but that's not really the point. The point was that was where the decentralized hive mind of DeFi, that was the understanding that they had, like a month or two before this article was published. So I think that's something to keep in mind if you're trying to found a project in this space or in an adjacent space. Another important thing to keep an eye on is the fact that governance, participation, and incentives are completely unsolved. So it's really awesome that we've got all these DeFi protocols out there that are essentially performing what we would call like decentralized autonomous organization governance experiments in public. And we can see what's happening and we can see how the incentives play out. However, one of the things we've learned is people don't take part currently. This is very dangerous because it means that your protocol might never be able to react to changes that are necessary to be created, because just simply none of the stakeholders are incentivized to take part. They're all just incentivized to hold the token for whatever reason and let someone else take part in the governance. You might even argue, actually, that governance is actually a burden, not necessarily a benefit. It's just another way of looking at it. And I think if you have a pure governance token, which I believe at least Compound was at the beginning, I'm not sure if they've changed this, but if you have a pure governance token, this also creates very dangerous incentives because you do not have an incentive to create good governance. You actually have an incentive. So imagine I buy a whole bunch of these tokens for a pure governance protocol that's doing some kind of like issuance of a new token in some kind of like yield farming fashion. Let's just say in our hypothetical world. But I'm not getting any sort of profit sharing or anything like that. I'm just getting governance rights if I hold this token. Well, now, like, what is my incentive to govern this token well, or govern the protocol well? Actually, what I'm more likely to do is buy a bunch of this stuff. Also buy a bunch of trying not to use the word shitcoin. Buy a bunch of a shitcoin. Use my voting share in the DAO to get it listed as one of the tokens for which governance rewards are given. Then people will start to buy this token. I start to dump the token, and there we go. I've now created an upside from the holding of the DAO governance token. But of course, this is not necessarily in the best interest of the protocol. And I think we've actually already seen a few of these instances. I'm not going to name the tokens or the parties that are involved in this, but we've definitely seen a few instances where funds have cottoned on to the fact that they don't really have an incentive to make sure that the protocol succeeds long term, but they do have an incentive to use the protocol to extract value in other forms. Very, very dangerous. We need to keep an eye on this. Or we need to make sure that we design our mechanisms correctly such that this is not a problem. So we can see here, Uniswap, proposal lowering the quorum threshold. Yeah, that makes sense because they couldn't get any votes passed before. Okay, because no one was taking part in governance because there was no incentive to do so. Well, that's all well and good, but then consider what happens when you lower the quorum threshold, and then someone can, of course, come along, and if there's one vote they really care about, they just buy a bunch of tokens, they signal the start of the vote, and then they can basically like subvert the DAO. It's extremely dangerous. Also, another thing to take note of is that founder distributions and distributions for foundations and this kind of thing can often lead to a situation where the DAO is, let's say, not very decentralized. Like this was the starting situation for the Curve DAO, because and it was not. I really like Curve for what it's worth, actually, but this wasn't like the founders wanted to do something bad. It's just actually the founders are staked into the success of the protocol for a very long period of time, so they have a really large voting share. But that, of course, means that you don't really have decentralized governance at all. You have a potentially decentralized later governance model, which is not the same thing. Something that there are mechanisms that we can use to get around this. This is a blog post from Vitalik in 2014 talking about Futarchy, which is essentially a system by which, it's a little bit complicated, we don't have enough time to get into it now, but basically the idea is that we stake on an outcome in the future and then we vote. And then if that outcome produces greater economic rewards, then we can distribute some of those rewards to the people that voted for it. And now, as long as economics are the only thing we're caring about the outcomes for, then people are incentivized to perform good governance. That's a kind of potential solution to the situation. There's others. If you're interested, I'd love to chat to you about it after the talk. Yes. Okay. Final reminder, not really a learning this time. The markets can still stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. One of the really interesting behaviors we saw from the DGen crowd over the summer was people knowing that what they were taking part in was not sensible investment decisions. However, simply if they want to make money, they can, well, actually, that's not quite the right way to say it. They know that it is a sensible investment decision to buy into something like, I don't know, pasta could be one that we talk about. Even though, of course, they know that the protocol is essentially worthless. And this is really interesting. There are incentives, of course, to go along with something completely irrational and to invest in something, even if it makes no sense. And this can have very distorting effects on markets in the short to medium term. Over the long term, theoretically, the market should be efficient, but over the short term, definitely isn't always the case. That's something, again, that the Web3 founders should keep in mind while founding their projects and thinking about the mechanism designs that should go into their, for example, profit-sharing communities. Anyway, this has been a kind of brief overview of some of the thoughts we've been having at Arweave about the summer of DGen. Yeah, I'd love to hear any kind of comments, queries from the audience, and if you want to discuss this further, please do come and join us on our Discord server. Yeah, where we talk about mechanism design all day.
Hey, Sam. So we are kind of over in terms of time. So if you can just pick one question you really like, that'd be great.
Okay.
You can look at ask a question at the bottom, or you can pick something in the chat if something comes through now.
How to govern? Yeah, the first question is super easy. I didn't read the others, sorry, but let's go with that. How to govern dev proposals and enactment. In today's DeFi DAOs, devs hold keys or multi-sig groups, which inherently is centralized. Yeah, this is a huge problem. And I think it actually points to an even more dangerous problem. And, we're quite a few minutes over, so I don't want to get into it too much. And please do come talk to me afterwards if you're interested. But I would say that the bigger problem is actually GitHub centralization. All of the crypto space is stored on GitHub, which is insane. That means that someone out there has a very select few people that are not selected in a decentralized manner, have the ability to add and remove code from all of the node software that we're running in the crypto space, essentially, and subsequently all of the contracts on top, the safety of all of the contracts on top of that. I think one of the solutions to this is potentially a platform called dgit.sh, which is something that some of the members of the Arweave community have been building essentially a profit-sharing community where DAOs can govern GitHub repositories. Yeah, Microsoft bought GitHub, so we're totally safe. You're absolutely right. Anyway, I'd love to chat more about this. I'm always on the Arweave Discord. If you go to arweave.org, you can find a link. Thanks so much, everyone.
If you want to drop your Twitter handle into the chat, that'd be great, because then they can follow you.
Sure, will do. I gotta actually remember it.
It's okay. We can just find it later.
Yeah, perfect.
All right. Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the talk. It was really great.